Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and today our guest is Eric Gross. Hi Eric.
Hello.
And Eric's written a book here which I got a few months ago. I really enjoyed, and he's come over to visit to the UK, so we finally got him in the studio. And the full title is Liberation from the Lie, Cutting the Roots of Fear Once and for All. That's the book. So Eric, you start with a quote in the book. The world is in crisis, we are in crisis. What do you mean by that?
Well, the world is in crisis. We are experiencing environmental crisis, political crisis, economic crisis. And the roots of this crisis lie in the individual himself. And what I mean by this specifically is that when we as individuals are identified with lack, we will always be motivated to always be acquiring more. We never can have enough. We can never be enough. We can never have enough power. So when most people in the world feel this way, the world must constantly be in conflict. It must be like a kind of cancer that must always be expanding in the realms of power, possession, in this ceaseless craving to have more. And because the identification is with lack, it can never be satisfied. It is an endless process, and it expresses itself in every dimension of human activity. Whether you're a boy who cannot impress his father enough with how athletic he is or good in school, his grades are never enough. We're taught to be not enough. And because we are identified with this, I am not enough as I am, then you're never really at peace with yourself. So peace eludes us, not just as individuals, but as when you get a group of 1,000 lacking individuals together, now you have a group that lacks.
So we're always trying to fill a hole inside, and we try and fill it by getting more on the outside.
Right, and it's that sense of internal a life out of balance, because I've never really had both my feet square on the ground. I'm always a little vulnerable, a little anxious, because our periods of balance and of feeling centered are brief. They're sort of punctuations in this life that can never be meaningful enough. It can never fully satisfy us, because this now is, well, that's already happened. I'm always looking forward in the future. This illusory, carrot at the end of the stick kind of thing that we're always trying to get a grasp on, whether it's professional achievement and attainment, whether it's having enough friends, because loneliness is a great experience of lack when you're without friends, or whether it's spiritual enlightenment. Lack will be the power that feeds all of these drives. It's the great mother.
The thing is, we're unaware of this, most of us, most of the time, aren't we?
Exactly. We are unaware of it. And because we put all of our belief in that future payoff. If I meditate long enough, if I'm diligent enough, I'll finally get the love I don't have enough of in my life. If I have enough relationships, it'll validate me. And that's the key word, is I need to be validated, because I myself cannot validate myself. So in fact, the underlying identity is with invalidation. And that's really what my book is about. The shadow cast by invalidation. And it fills every aspect of our lives.
Okay, I want to start with a little bit with your journey, how you got to this realization. And your book, of course, is a lot about how we deal with this lack and how we find peace and contentment and fulfillment. So what I really liked in the book is you started off saying you used to be a mild Marxist.
I was, and but I say mild Marxist because something in my heart told me that politics or political theory or living your life politically, that's kind of a narrow field. You know, I'd never fully embraced Marx and Lenin, and I'd go to these meetings and I'd hear the people, you know, talking about the liberation of the worker. And I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of workers that I'm not sure if I really want them all that liberated because, you know, there was something else going on there, and I didn't really know what it was. And then I got a job at the New York City Department of Health as a departmental statistician. And I had a friend there who gave me this book by Krishnamurti, and he said, I really recommend that you read this. And I must have been 26 or 27. It was The Awakening of Intelligence by Krishnamurti. And I started reading this book, and it literally blew me away. I went, this is what I've been seeking. This exploration of lack, because Krishnamurti spends a lot of time about this will to achieve. I have to become. He always talks about becoming, and seeing the false as the false. And I love that line from Krishnamurti. And the truth will arise all on its own. And that really resonated with me. So I read it voraciously, and then I tried to use his awareness or attention practice, which he talked about. I never felt it quite grabbed me, and so I joined a group of, I got involved in Zen meditation and eventually got a teacher in the Zen tradition. When I say I got a teacher, I was drawn to a teacher in the Zen tradition. And I went to retreats and meditated a great period of my life. And that was very powerful for me.
And you spent a lot of time, you were saying, about writing down your thoughts and your experiences.
I did. I kept journals, which I just kept for my own personal use. And always questioning, you know, that's what sort of I think I got from Krishnamurti. Questioning everything. Is this true? And ceaselessly questioning, and then, you know, finally questioning the core belief: do I exist? Is the self real? And you know, it's also certainly part of the Zen tradition. And I realized I couldn't find a self outside of finding small, sort of microscopic beliefs like I'm funny, say. I'm a funny person. That's myself. And I go, but much of the time I'm not funny.
So you could find descriptions of yourself, but you couldn't find the essence.
Right, the essence. There was no essence that could be held by words. And yet I could know that on an intellectual level. And I think it's rather easy to know that on an intellectual level, but experiencing it experientially in a sustained way is what eludes most seekers. And so, you know, and I think that became the challenge. And another interesting thing, and I don't think I mentioned this in the book, is that when I lived at this monastery, and I was around other meditators, it occurred to me when I was among them, I said, this is the most ambitious group of people I've ever seen. I have never seen a group of people more filled with desire than these meditators. And yet the Buddha says the root of all suffering is desire in the Four Noble Truths.
So their desire was to become free, enlightened, realize, whatever we call it.
Exactly.
And you were correlating this with material desire.
Right. And I was, right, exactly. And I was struck with the irony. I said, here I am in a, you know, spiritual environment, and it is so filled with desire. And I remember sort of almost chuckling to myself about this and going, and I went to the teacher and I said, I feel that I'm in a place that's filled with desire. I might as well be in a business school. You know, people want to get their MBAs so they can make lots of money in the business world. And he also chuckled when he heard this. And I said, if we are to take the Buddha's word as his word, the desire is the root of suffering, is this really the right place? And he would, of course, say something like, well, is it right for you? You know, taking all that other judgment of my fellow meditators and then focusing. And then I said, that really, that question sort of focused the key issue. Forget about them. Is it right for you?
And you also talk in the book about the more you searched, the more miserable you became.
Absolutely. Because one of the gifts of seeking, of endless seeking, is the misery it creates. because until we are just exhausted by exploring every possibility, every lifeline that we think conceptual thought provides us, until we're truly exhausted by that, and we really experience kind of a crisis, we'll be seeking for the whole of our lives. And if there's multiple lives, we'll be seeking for future lives, that there's no end to it.
Let's drop my notes here. So there was points where you felt you had it, but then it would slip away, didn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it's a common experience. You finally feel this immense clearing and this spacious awareness, and you go, yeah, I got it. The ego goes, yeah, I got it. And as soon as that happens, you've lost it. Because now you've claimed a possession, because that's what lack will do.
So let's look at this more closely. So something would happen, like something would open, you'd feel less identified with yourself, who you think you are.
Right.
And so, but the mind comes in and thinks, that's what I'm searching for. And it's kind of, the mind's used whatever happened for its own good somehow. It's back in the game.
Exactly. It's like, it in a way, the mind co-ops experience, because the mind goes, I'm really who you are. It tells us in very tones of great authority that you are your thoughts. And so that authority wants to be obeyed. And when the mind says, I got it, the authority has spoken. And now the spacious awareness begins contracting, and you're back to where you started. And it's a very up and down experience for seekers. They get a taste, and then almost as soon as it happens, sometimes within minutes, I think, you're back to where, and then you go, what is the point of all of this? And then you're once again, it almost gets worse, because you think, the mind thinks progressively. I've gone from A to B, I just have to make it to like letter M, and I'm at D and E and F, and then I'm really back, now I'm back really to A.
And we all have this, I know this for myself, so I think we're all seekers somehow, people that are looking beyond the norm have this.
Yes.
But then you had a breakthrough, didn't you?
I did. I had many times where I thought I had it figured out, and I found when I later explored this, the part of us that let me word this a little differently. It is, I would say that the way I understood this was that when we are born, it's just little babies, we are truly integrated in our authentic selves. And then this invalidation experience happens, and a wound develops around that. And we are sort of cast out of the Garden of Eden there. We lose contact with that authentic being self. And I think of this authentic being as light. It is what sees, okay? This wound effect occurs, but the wound itself is porous because it can be seen. Anything that can be seen is the light of the authentic being, everything. Whether it's through our eyes, or ears, or taste, or touch, or feel, or even the way we think. It is seen. It is the light of presence. So the wound forms, but the wound is not a solid shell. It is porous. It allows the light of our authentic being to shine through. There's yet another layer, the fear self, which forms around the wound, and that too is porous. Because it is porous to the wound effect, which is suffering, and so to the original presence.
When you say the fear self, you're talking about the ego, personality, are you?
I intentionally didn't use the term ego in my book, because the ego is such an emotionally loaded word, because I do believe in the positive ego. We think of the ego as negative. And of course, it's an ego that thinks of the ego as negative. It splits itself into many forms. So I intentionally avoided using the term ego. But this porosity is important, because when we have these experiences, what happens is the fear self and the wound open up to presence. Right. Yeah. And what happens is they become more porous, so more light is left in. But the problem is this porosity begins to contract into smaller, and the light is again blocked. And I think that's what happens. I thought of it as both as a visual process. because, and I think it's important because most of us are visual learners. If we can see it rather than think it, if we can see it, it has clarity. So when we know that the authentic being is always there, when we know it is there in presence, and presence is always with you, you can't stop it, you can't will it away, no matter how distraught or painful your life may be, no matter how identified you are with the lack of success in your life, that presence shows it all, that it can be with these things and still be present. So, in a way, the spiritual journey, another term I'm reluctant to use because it seems to have a progressive quality to it, it is the seeing of everything. And the more you see the identification with these other layers, whether it be a fear self or a wound, the more you see, the more liberated, free you are from those effects. Whether they ever go away in their entirety, I personally doubt. So there's always going to be some contraction. But that contraction is also a blessing.
I wrote down, just to make this as clear as we can, I wrote down what you call the cycle that we go through. So there's the birth, obviously, that you talked about, and when you have the feeling of oneness, there's a separation, which we go through.
Yes.
There's the identification of the wound, which you talked about, the creation of the fear self,
Yes.
which you talked about, and that leads to identification of who we are not.
Right.
I.e., think we are this separate individual. And then there's the seeing, the understanding of the fear self, and then there's the making peace with the wound, and then there's returning to the authentic. I want just to put together, I think it's very clearly you've laid out the different stages that we go through on the journey.
Yes.
So anyway, you got to the stage where you had your breakthrough and where you saw your words were, who we believe ourselves to be is a construct. You saw that.
Yes, I did.
That's a major breakthrough.
It is, and in fact, it's the only decisive breakthrough that anyone would ever need, is to see who you are not, because you can never see who you truly are, because it is the source of seeing itself. It's as if, the eyes cannot see themselves, they just see. The authentic being cannot be conceptualized into an object. We can see our wound, and we can see our fear selves, and we can see the ever-changing environment in which this body and mind live. But authentic being itself is purely experiential. It cannot be seen.
But
it's the source of experience.
How did you feel when you had this realization?
Well,
it's a big realization to have.
It is, and the feeling, the catharsis of this feeling, of this experience, is to me, I know this might sound trivial to people watching this program. There's a sense of comic hilarity to it that I took myself to be this pompous expert, or this this sort of awkward body mind is stumbling about life, going here and there, and seeing it as all one great fiction, and then seeing the propensity, once that is seen, to negate that. So what happens is a very subtle fear self emerges in your life. It becomes, in fact, the spiritual fear self, which negates our stories.
All these different parts of us.
Right. And so what happens is, and that's often the end point for many seekers, the spiritual fear self, which negates the stories. And I hear it all the time on videos on the internet, and I read it from other writers. The final, if you want to use the word cathartic breakthrough, is in fact that itself contracts into another form of individuality, the spiritual fear self, because it's like there's something in Zen called the Zen ox herding pictures, which you get to the 0 point of there's no self, no world, no nothing. And that's only one station on the journey. Eventually, you go back to where you began. But the difference is, from the beginning, the difference is you love your stories and the stories of others. And you love your own stories, but the sort of the umbilical cord, which connects identity, the belief system that says these stories are me, these stories are you, these stories are our world, that belief is severed. And then, right.
So what happened was that, again, I'm looking at my notes, was directly from your book here. You saw the one looking for answers wasn't the real me, and that's explained why what you saw in the monastery when you were there, that people were looking for enlightenment and peace, but it was the same energy, it was the same process, if you like, that you look for success in the material world, but you saw through that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what everyone who is in this process will eventually see. They'll eventually see that this ideation, this personality, this construct, is something that had to be. It has to be. And it has to continue being. We are still a construct in the world. Other people will frame us this way. And in order to communicate with other people, in order to be in the world, we have to, in a certain respect, embrace aspects of that construct. I mean, whether it's your role as someone who's interviewing me at this present time, or whether it is me being a tourist in London.
Yeah.
The construct continues. It's simply that the realization that this has absolutely nothing to do with your essential selves.
Because the being, as you said earlier, is still shining in the background. It's
Exactly.
just covered up by these different stages we go through in life that
Right.
get
And
in the way.
it's always there. And when you know it's always there, there's no place to go.
Right. Okay, so in the book, in fact, you talk about the book being, it's the fruits of your own seeking and observations, and it's a liberation manual. Now, that's
Yes.
quite a claim. So how is it a liberation manual? Let's start there.
Well, in a way, I thought of it as a manual in that people, I often do consultations via the web. And I tell people, I am not a teacher. I am not in any regard a guru or a guide. The only guide you have is you. So there are as many journeys as there are human beings. And although we have much more in common than we have in difference, it's the difference that's key to you, because it's what makes you unique. And each of us is unique. So your journey, her journey, his journey is unique to themselves and their own experience in this life, in this body, mind. So why I called this a manual, to respond to your question, was to use the questions, and there are questions in this book, or descriptions of experience, and see if they resonate in your own life. And to meditate or reflect on that in your own immediate, daily, non-conceptual, non-theoretical experience. Is this true? And to really mine that question. Is it true? And that is it true? Is the wound real? Is the fear? Are the fear selves real? Is any of this real? So as a manual, it takes a seeker, first of all, from we talked about this prior to the interview, this cultural being as a modern member of civilization, and then takes that person all the way back to their beginning existence as a human being, and how the human being is molded. And the question is that in fact true for your own direct experience? And that's why I call it a manual. And it takes us through looking at the most subtle aspects of the fear self, because literally the devil is in the details.
You call it a manual for deconstruction.
For deconstruction. It's a deconstruction of the...
So it's a taking apart by understanding and realization of all the false sides of ourselves that have been created over the years. Is that correct? Basically?
Exactly. That is exactly how it works. And so when we see who we are not, although that persona will want to continue its existence as the object of identification, the more you question it, the more, and more importantly, the more you just see it, which is just what Krishnamurti talked about. The more you see it in action, especially in relationship to your intimate partner, if you have children, and also your parents. The more intimate it is, that's where the wounded fear selves are most clearly articulated in our lives, with people with whom we are most intimate. And And all I advise people is the more you see, the more you will learn. And the more you see, the more aligned you will be with awareness.
So, Eric, give me an example of something in your process when you went through this for yourself, what was particularly helpful, something in a relationship or whatever that you saw, and that was a key or an important part of your own deconstruction.
Well, in the book, I do a series of fear self types,
Yes,
which are very common, and we have more than one fear self, but there tends to be a dominant one. And because of my own cultural and family background, I grew up in a family where I had an older brother who was academically really outstanding, and I came from a very, very competitive family, and so I wanted my brother to love me. I wanted him to validate me. So he was very into classical music and listening to Bach and Mozart and Beethoven, and I also listened to the same composers. And I would say, "Hey, Rich, doesn't Bach write an interesting?" I would say something, and he would go. He wouldn't even hear me. And I'd say, "Hey, Rich," and I would want him to attend to me, and he wouldn't. And I hope if he sees this video, he might be offended. But I'd want his attention, but he would barely raise his head. And I felt very hurt inside. I felt that I was entitled, deserved attention. But I also felt maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe I'm just irrelevant. And I wanted to be heard, and I wanted my voice to be accorded some value. And it wasn't happening in my family. And even when my parents got together with other parents, they'd go, "Here's Richard, he's our smart son. And here's Eric. He's sort of like the family ne'er-do-well."
They really said that?
Oh, literally. Oh, right. My family is, anyone who knows my family, the absolute stark criticism. I remember even when I met my wife, Cynthia, my mom said to me, she goes, "Yeah, you're funny now and then, but what has she really seen you?" And I would say, actually, that's really for her to decide. I'm not, not for you.
So how did the healing take place for you with this issue?
I felt this, that's probably one of the great things that planted the seed, was this internal pain of, am I irrelevant? Am I really stupid? And so what happens is, exactly as the book would predict, a fear self takes over. I'll prove to them how smart I am. Right. So I worked very hard at school to get good grades. Look, I'm as smart as Richie. There's the ego going, I'm in a race of life and death. I must become the expert. I must compensate for this pain. And so I invested my powerlessness, because that's what the wound is all about, the absence of power. This lack force means I need more power. And the way my persona did it, remember, we all said it's unique. I don't know about your persona or these other people, is how do we try to hoard this power in our own experience to prove our worthiness to be loved, the worthiness to be accorded value. And so this became my path. And so it is a very heavy burden to carry this through life. And one day, it just occurred to me, I must have been in my 20s, I said, this is really a load of crap. I don't have to prove myself to anyone or anything, and then also to myself. Who is this self that needs to be impressed? What is this world that I need to prove my worthiness to be loved? And then many years later, and this is important for your viewers to hear, is when I started working with the Navajo Indians as part of a large federal project on peacemaking and violence reduction. A Navajo healer told me this one day. He said, "Eric," he went like this, they speak in a very mellifluous, sad way in a way, but I don't know if they even hear it as sad, but to my ears it was. He goes, "Do you know that every person who is born comes directly from the Creator, the Great Spirit? And the same force that makes the mountains, the rivers, the stars in the sky made you and made me. And we came here to sing our song in the perfection of that birth as who we are." And I heard him say that. And I said, "Isn't it interesting in our culture? we become the pleasers of others. We must please our parents.
Else's song.
Right. So we wind up exactly. That's beautifully said. We become. How do we love in their culture is a given. You are loved because you exist. In our culture, love is something you earn. Whether you're 2 years old and well-behaved, look at my good little, Iain, or my good little Eric. Look how well-mannered he is. And now you're getting points with the power source, your parents. So we become wedded to obedience, because we know through obedience of other people's rules, we get the gold stars.
Now, I understand how this process works.
Yeah.
You described it very well. So you saw that for yourself.
I
that
did.
wasn't really who you really are, and you were able to let go of that.
Exactly. And in reading, I love reading Walt Whitman, because he celebrates this positive ego of my uniqueness, my song, and he celebrates that of others.
Right.
It's all a celebration. So when I heard that word, the Navajo, we can sometimes know these things, but sometimes we need to hear it from someone else to really make the connection. Hence the books and the interviews and all the rest in our world, which is a gift. So when I heard this, you realize there is no seeking that ever needs to be. You only have to find sort of your own song and start being loving this body and mind that's been divested to other sources of external sources of power. So, when you go, well, Osho said this, or Lao Tzu says this, and I'll go, I don't care what they say. What is it you say? What is your voice? And when we begin loving our own stories, our own beingness, we naturally will become the celebration of this now, exactly how an Eckhart Tolle might describe it. We're no longer fighting. The fighting is over. The struggle is over. Life will give you plenty of challenges, but you'll meet those challenges in the way you meet them.
Because you talk about, in the book, there's a section called "Are You Living Your Passion?"
Right.
And this sounds like what you're really talking about. It's disconnecting from all the false parts that you've learnt or you've somehow got identified with over the years, and then finding what's really shining through, which is your passion.
Right, and exactly. And you find your passion as something that you enjoy, that you love. By the way, it could be cooking a delicious dinner. It could be anything. It could be taking a walk. It could be it doesn't really matter. As long as you know you're not doing it to gain validation from others or yourself, that is a true passion. It is done for its own sake. You don't have to be Rembrandt, and you don't have to be Walt Whitman, but it's your song.
Tell me how you live your passion.
Well, I love writing, and so I do this blog. It's a lot of work, but I love the work, so it's not really work.
Yeah.
I love my but you know something? That's more of a craft, of which I have still a tireless self-critic. Every blog piece I write, I go, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. It's terrible. But that self-criticism, that's part of the song too, and I'm fine with that. And so
it's an acceptance.
It's a full a total heartfelt acceptance of what we are, that we don't need to impress others or ourselves. And by the way, if you want to impress someone else, as long as it's seen that way, and you're okay with that, that too works.
So let me try and get this clearer. So what you're saying is, it's the tension of holding on to things that you have judgment about, which you're not. And if it's somehow in a flow, and there might be a little bit of self-criticism, but it's very light, you allow that because somehow you see it as part of who you are.
Right, because it comes and goes. Presence is always there. Presence is sort of you begin realizing that you can be present to anything, including your own death. And when you can be present to that, which you will in fact be present for, the day will come, you realize there's a power there, far more powerful than anything you ever sought externally. And the power is presence. And it's not the power of forcing people to do what you want them to do. It's the power to be present with anything, in however it manifests in your life. Whether it's a husband or wife who leaves you, losing a job, you are present to that.
And what does being present mean to you?
Presence is the effortless beingness of this moment. Because any self-questioning, any introspection, any kind of going against yourself has already happened by the time you're even consciously aware of it. Life unfolds even before we know it. That's why this now thing is so elusive. It itself cannot be grasped. We can only grasp a memory or some future projection. You go, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a great day because I'll be with my friends and we're gonna be watching some sporting event. That's graspable, even though it's an object of fantasy. This now itself has happened before we're consciously aware. So presence takes care of everything. You never need to worry about one other thing in your life, for it has already happened. And so all of this feedback loop of, oh my God, I'm going to be so screwed, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, all of that is the whole personality belief that is the false identity operating. And you go, you actually find it farcical, comical, melodramatic, histrionic, completely unnecessary to your well-being or that song that you yourself have.
You talk towards the end of the book about the background and the foreground.
Yeah, you know, nothing that we say as a body mind is original. And I was influenced in this section of the book by Alan Watts, who the fear, self, and wound are oriented to foreground. Well, how will this help me? What advantage will I get out of this? Or what danger does this have for me? So you're always this push-pull of the foreground.
So the foreground is to do with the separation
Exactly.
of the individual.
I wish I had used those words. Exactly. That's where the separate self emerges in the things that we attend to. But that's okay. It's okay the moment you're aware that that's simply foreground material, that the presence is really the background of everything. And again, this is really just an issue of simple practice. You simply begin seeing it. That word seeing keeps on coming up. You start seeing it and it becomes second nature. You'll fall back in the full identification of foreground. It happens. Who cares? It happens. You know, who would make a big deal out of that? Would it not be a fear self? Would it not be a negative ego saying, again, invalidating, see, you don't really have it?
So you're saying practically in your life, you fall back sometimes, you get entwined in a little drama or something, and then you see you got entwined, you're present with it, and then it's gone and you move on. Is that?
Yeah, there is a predilection, especially in Advaita circles, about the absence of individuality. And to me, that's an absolutist position. There is an individuality, except the individuality is into the larger structure of connection. It's what the Buddha would say, is that there is no independent reality or thing in the universe. Everything is interconnected. So there's and this is because we're in the world of words here. We're talking. And as soon as you're in words, you're in thought. And you say and think this, and I say and think that. We are, therefore, in a way, forced to use words, because that's how we communicate. So it's very difficult to express this using words. But the paradox between individuality and infinite connectedness, something that they seem separate when we use words, but in reality, in truth, they're aligned as one. And that's exactly the definition of the word Advaita, not two. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why Advaita uses that term, not two, instead of just saying one. It's not, and that's the paradox. The word Advaita itself beautifully expresses that paradox of both individuality and the connection in this source oneness. It's a perfect word. We have no word in English that I think parallels it.
You also talk about the body holding tension too, and I wonder how you dealt with that in your journey.
Well, that's the body is a beautiful thermometer, a beautiful barometer of because the mind can fool itself. The mind can fool itself with conceptual reality, but when you feel tension in the body, you can sometimes sense where repressed feelings and thoughts are being stored in the body. It's a tricky place because the body itself is a machine. And just like any other machine, it will encounter problems. We live in a very complex world with germs, injuries, physical challenges. The body itself will experience pain, but the emotional holding of well, I think we can use the term, the holding down, repressing of feelings. Remember, when we are invalidated, a false persona must arise. So therefore, the authentic being becomes pushed down, and that creates an ever-present tension.
Imprints on the body, doesn't it?
Exactly. So it must be tense. You can never be fully relaxed. And one of the really interesting things is anyone who spent time among tribal people, whether it's in the world of tribal human beings is really small now in the world, whether it's in New Guinea or whether it's on an Indian reservation and you're dealing with a group of elderly healers, there is a sense of relaxation and comic of laughter about them that is so natural and so beautiful that sometimes when a tense Westerner sees this, they go, there's something there in their bodies which I'm not having in my body. You are, actually, but it's simply being covered by these repressed feelings. Again, I'm going to quote a Navajo healer who made a beautiful statement about that. He said the portal to awakening, remember, they've never read anything from Advaita. They know very little about Buddhism. He said the portal of awakening is a broken heart. It's sadness. It's melancholy. You must mourn the loss of authentic being and the arising of what is false. When that shell cracks, he said the shell that cracks is the heart itself. But he said the portal of awakening is a broken heart, but the sign of awakening is laughter.
Okay.
And he said, you have to go through the broken heart to get to rich, natural laughter. And I was once at a meeting with a group of Navajo healers, and they're all laughing and clowning around, and one of them looked around at me and said, hey, Eric, do we look like a bunch of clowns to you? Out of the blue. This is what they do all the time. And I went, what? He said, we're all laughing. Does it seem like we're not serious to your white eyes? And I went, no, not necessarily. But it caught me by surprise. And he said, because the white man is always serious. He always has a goal. This must seem silly to him. And I realized that's another red flag, is we get very serious about ourselves and our lives. We get I got to get this. And that's, again, seriousness is one of the reddest of red flags for where another fear self is now fully in charge. I'm serious. It's almost, that itself becomes an object of, you see how funny that is too. Your own sense of taking yourself very seriously and get easily offended. And I think we've observed this in various spiritual circles, how serious and easily offended people can be. They get very brittle in these environments.
So, let's say somebody is attracted by what you're saying to me here today and they get your book.
Mm-hmm.
What's the starting point, really, if they haven't done much work on themselves and they realize that their life doesn't work, they connect with what you're saying about the fear self? You do give different examples of fear selves in there.
I do.
And there's also a process. Do you want to talk briefly about your process?
Once again, what part of the book, or of anyone's book, incidentally, whether it's my books or reading something by another writer, what part grabs you is the part that grabs you in your heart, not so much your head. Don't be analytical. what part moves you emotionally? I think the emotions run deeper, a little deeper than the thoughts. So whatever resonates in your heart moves you, really moves you, that's a starting place. And the place I always return to is, and the word return is important. This is not a place of going forward. It's really a process of returning. We return to that authentic self. It's always there waiting for us. It never will leave us, because it's the very light that, in fact, we see this. And the more we're disidentified with objects, whether it's our persona or whether it's our bank account, whether it's low or high, the more disidentified we are with these things personally, the more aligned we are with that light. And however, whatever steps that you or someone else take, or myself, is the steps that had to be taken. Whether it takes 10 years, 20 years, or 10 weeks or 20 weeks. You'll feel this opening up the more aligned you are with presence. And it's not a struggle to be present, because you already are present. That's an endless loop. That's a hopeless loop in my view. It's the seeing of what is false. What Krishnamurti said, seeing the false is false, the truth will arise on its own. So, to me, I don't prescribe a way, although there are quite a few descriptions of processes and exercises in this book. I don't necessarily think they're for every reader. So that's why I provide many of them. So whatever moves you, and by the way, what moves you now may not move you 6 months down the line. I think all good books, and I hope mine is a good book, merit rereadings, because you'll see different layers of meaning. And I reread what I think are the best books all the time, and I'm always seeing new things from I think the most gifted spokespeople in this field. And I really am grateful to, in our world and our culture, that we can go back to these things that are written, that we can go back to them. It's like going back to an old friend and learning deeper levels of meaning. Because there's, I don't believe this idea that a journey is complete is another fiction to the ego. Like, I made it, I'm done, finished.
But do you feel you're essentially free?
I do, and I have measured.
What does that feel like?
I do, because.
Now, what does it feel like? Not
it
because.
Feels.
What does it feel like?
It feels like, it really does feel like freedom. Like whatever happens, I'm totally cool with it, including people telling me your book is a load of crap. I go like that, and I go, that's good, interesting. Why? I have no personal investment. However, I do admire their point of view, even if it's negative, because I'm curious. There's a sense of wonder in the world, a constant, this magic, this miracle of existence. And I know that I can be present with anything. And isn't that what freedom really is? The bedrock foundation realization that you can be present with anything, even your most negative stories.
And who's the one that's being present with everything? This is the bottom line question.
That is the bottom line question, and it's a question I wish there were an easy answer for, because I can easily say to you, presence, but then I wouldn't be being fully honest with you, because I believe that there is a self there. I don't know whether it's a soul or whether it's Atman or what, but I would be dishonest with you if I didn't say there's some self there which feels free. Free to express itself as it wishes, as it desires in this moment. Free to contradict itself. It's like Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes, I can contradict myself. That freedom to be as it is in this moment. And because anyone who's been on this path, and I know, Iain, this has been part of your experience, you know that we are all connected. The idea of invalidating another, of making them suffer and feel bad because you got a kick out of it, is poison to me. And so the beauty of this, the beauty of the wound, is that it becomes our teacher of suffering. Because unless you know suffering firsthand, truly know it, truly embrace it, then you really can't be compassionate with another because you don't know what they're going through, or you've denied it in your own experience. I only have love. You've also had suffering, and thank God for that, because now you know what other people are going through. It's the one thing that connects us, is suffering. And that's part of our deepest. So we go, deepest sense of experience. So when we go out into the earth, in the world, because the world itself suffers now, because of pollution, dead rivers, dead skies, dead lands, destroyed habitats, our heart goes out. And when our heart goes out through suffering, the gift of suffering, that sense of connection on the heart level is established. And there's a beauty in that. That's why we shouldn't be consumed with pushing away the what we call the negative. That's simply a superego telling us this is negative. It's embracing that, what we would call the negative, and seeing the beauty in that, because until you see the beauty in what the spiritual superego calls the negative, you will be a prisoner of that superego. So that's why there is a role for sadness and suffering in life. It's an essential role of compassion. You'll never understand the Buddha's notion of compassion unless you embrace your own suffering and go, I embrace my suffering as I embrace yours, and we are together on that. There's nothing to fight against.
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
There's nothing to fight against.
No.
Good place to stop. Eric, I appreciate you coming along and talking to me on Conscious TV.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
And just to remind you again, Liberation from the Lie, Cutting the Roots of Fear Once and for All is Eric's book. And I want to thank you for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Hi, my name's Eric Gross, and what I'm going to do in this very short segment is describe a Navajo peacemaking ceremony. And I'm the author of this book, Liberation from the Lie, Cutting the Roots of Fear Once and for All. And what I'm going to describe is a true story, which I was present at. It is a situation in which a young man, a young Navajo man, and the Navajo are a very large tribe in the United States of Native Americans or Indians. He got a gun and in a fit of rage broke his mother's jaw with the gun. And what happens in peacemaking is on the day before peacemaking, the victim, which they don't use the term victim, but the mother met with the peacemaker, and the peacemaker saw her bandages and asked what had happened. And she said, with tones of weeping, she said, my son got a gun and he was drunk and he hit me in the face with it and broke my jaw. And the peacemaker looked at the mother and said, do you love your son? And she said, I don't know if I love my son. And he said, tomorrow at the actual peacemaking, speak only of love. Do not speak of the injury or of the attack. Speak only of love. And we're going to find out why that is such a powerful approach to restorative reconciliation. So the next day, in a peacemaking, there's a large table, and often there are many members of a family around. Peacemakings are busy, crowded affairs. In this case, the young man's brother was there, his girlfriend was there, his baby child was there, his mom and father was there, a peacemaker was there, his sister-in-law was there, and I was there. And it begins with the peacemaker says to the mother, speak your voice. He gives no instructions. And the mother was sitting sort of catty-corner from the son who hit her. And she looked at her son directly, and she said, you are my son. You came from my body. And as soon as she began saying this, the son put his hand up to block her eye contact. So he sat there like this, with his hand up. And she said, "Do you remember when you were a baby and I would sing you songs? And do you remember we'd go up on the mesa and we'd look at the moon together and I would hold you? And I would look into your eyes and I loved what I saw. And you were so full of life and laughter. And I would say, this is my son, the son that I love." And as she was saying these words, I could see the man. I was sitting behind him, and he had very long black hair, and he looked like a very classic, almost Hollywood Indian. He was very handsome. And I saw him begin to weep. His mind went back to this time of connection, this time of love, and he wept. And she spoke for 50 minutes of memories, of singing songs, of dancing, of festival dinners. And when she was finished, the peacemaker went to the father and said, "Father, you speak your voice." And the father got up from his chair and he went behind his son. And he put his hands on the son's shoulders. And he said, "When you were young, I said that when you grew up to be a man, they would say that you were better than your father." And when he said these words, everyone began weeping around the table. The son still had his hand up, shielding himself, but his body was quaking with weeping. Remember, no one accused him of a crime. No one said that he was bad or evil. No one said that he should spend several years in jail to think about what he did. All they talked about was love and connection. And the father spoke about his dreams for his son, that he would be a strong man among the Navajo, that he would be a man of wisdom, a man of compassion. And look where we are now. That's all he said, look where we are now. And eventually, it became the son's turn to speak. And I'm really shortening a very long, 3-hour ceremony. And the son said, he looked at his mother, and he said, "Mother, I am sorry." Remember, no one accused him of anything. No one mentioned the bandages, but all could see the bandages around her jaw. And he said, Mom, I'm sorry for what I did. I want you to believe me. And he said, I am an artist, and I am an artist of the dark side. That was his very words, because I have lived in the dark side. I'm a drunk. I'm an angry person. I'm a failure as a human being. He said these words. And he said, but from this day forward, I pledge to you that I'll be an artist of the side of light, that I will no longer be in the dark side. Now, let me just take a very brief stepping back here. The Navajo believe that our soul, what makes us unique, is the swirl of our fingerprints. And the same swirl can be found on the top of our head, our toes, and our tongue. And so one thing I noticed when I went out to Navajo land is they often shake hands, very often. And the reason they shake hands is so that this part of their hand can touch your hand. But it's not a direct touching when we shake hands. The fingers are on the back of the hand, if you can see, when we shake hands. But this time, the young man put his hand out like this. So his fingers were out there for his mother to see. And she put out her hand. And the hands met like this, so that her soul touched his soul. And when he put his hand up, such a powerful moment, he said, my soul touches your soul, Mom. And he said, may we be connected forever in this world and in all worlds. And he said, on this day I pledge that I will never drink again, and I will never take up violence. I will never raise my hand against another. Now, this man in his own life had been in and out of jail many times. He said And then he said, I've been arrested about 8 times, and every time you bailed me out. But this time you didn't bail me out. So I spent time in jail. I lived in the filth of the Navajo jail with open urine and broken toilets and a terrible place. And I was happy you didn't bail me out, because I knew in my heart that this is what I deserved. I knew that I had crossed a line. But with tears running down his face, he said, I pledge to you this moment that it will never happen again. And what we learned from the Navajo peacemaking is that we don't bring peace and connection through going through the facts. Well, you did this, and then I did this, and then you did this. Because when we go through the facts, what we're really doing is we're going through the facts as I understand them. Not as it is. We are living in. We are addressing this problem through separation. In Navajo peacemaking, they address a problem through connection. And I hope you see the difference. When I accuse another of hurting me, I am rejoicing in my celebration, in my separation. I am asserting my separation. I am living as separate. But when we use our memories and go back to the time of connection, of love and of harmony and of balance and of solidarity, we are starting with us, connected. And that's the power of the Navajo form of conflict resolution. So the real takeaway in this, the beautiful part of this, is that we unlearn how we have always approached conflict. And we learn that when we approach conflict, not through the circumstances of the event, but through our history of connection, an opportunity for transformation of really powerful, cathartic, sustainable transformation is allowed to arise. And that's really the magic and the power of peacemaking. There is no punishment in peacemaking. This man wouldn't go to jail. He wouldn't be paying a fine. But he had to say and sign a form saying, this is what I will do. And I tracked cases like this for 2 years in Navajo land. And Navajo land is a violent place. It's an extremely poor place. Indians are the poorest people in the United States, and the Navajos are, I believe, the poorest Indian tribe in the United States. It is a violent, poor, brutally destroyed world. They are a conquered people. They've been conquered by the United States military, and they've been also assaulted by modern religion, missionaries, Christianity in general. They live a hard life. And they've been able to revive their traditions of making peace and harmony in this world of conflict. And they will say that conflict is a gift if we know to begin with connection as opposed to separation, to provide the healing that not only do we need, but the healing that makes us whole through connection. So anyway, once again, I'm Eric Gross. I'm the author of Liberation from the Lie. And I hope you enjoyed this very brief, truncated description of Navajo peacemaking. Thank you for listening.